Hello again, fellow podcaster, and welcome back to Pod Theory. I'm your host, Jason Cercone, and today we're going to answer the question, how many co-hosts is too many? Now, to answer this question, it's important to understand that there really isn't a right or a wrong answer. The number of co-hosts that your podcast has should run parallel to the content you're going to deliver. Is your content best delivered with just a couple voices, or does it require multiple thoughts and multiple opinions and multiple personalities? I think about it this way. Back in the day, two famous movie critics that everyone knew were Siskel and Ebert. Their takes on the movies of that time influenced millions, and it only took two guys to make that happen. You never saw a movie review by Siskel, Ebert, Jones, Cercone, Smith, Thompson, and Maxwell, right? That content only needed their two voices to truly impact the audience. So that said, what's a number that's a win for you as a producer, as well as your audience? Traditional radio sticks to an axiom of 3 co-hosts per show. Personally, when I think of podcasts, up to 3 makes perfect sense too. Any more than 3 voices on a production and the water starts to get muddy. Now, except in the case of a special roundtable or a panel podcast, which typically isn't an every episode thing, having 4 or more voices makes it harder to record, harder to edit, and harder for the listener to consume. I've told the story in the past of podcasts I did when I was new to the game that featured way too many people. And while these podcasts may have been fun for all of us to record, the end product was a mess. It was difficult to edit, and it was nothing that the listener could enjoy. There was way too many sidetracks from the topic at hand. There were conversations between others that weren't part of the conversation at the moment speaking on the side, and it was being picked up by the mics, and just too many voices talking over one another. It was a total shit show. No matter how many co-hosts are on the mic, you want to have one person that leads the conversation and keeps things on track. Now, going back to radio terms, this person is called the anchor. And this person can easily lose their mind if they're trying to keep a large number of voices and personalities reined in so the production stays on the rails. This gets increasingly difficult when recording long distance through services like Riverside and Zoom. Too many people talking leads to the audio getting cut and distorted and adds a real challenge to the editing process. The person anchoring your show needs to be able to smoothly transition from one topic to the next and bring each segment to a conclusion. You want to designate this person before you begin recording, or else all hell is going to break loose, especially in a remote environment. Make sure you have the right person in place to keep the conversation flowing as smoothly as possible throughout your production. Now, I mentioned people talking over one another a moment ago. This is known as Overtalk, and naturally, the more voices you have on your show, the more chances for Overtalk increases. Now, there isn't anything more painfully annoying than listening to a podcast where all the personalities on the show talk over one another. And on the editing side, forget it. Trying to find a clean editing point is practically impossible. This only escalates as you add more voices to your show. And trying to cut out all of the content from the numerous rants that may take place only increases your editing time and keeps you from more important aspects of building your podcast. The best podcasts unfold when natural conversation takes place. Like any in-person and civil conversation, when one person finishes speaking, the next begins, and so on. Doing this with just a few voices is much easier to manage. Trying to seamlessly go from one person to the next when there are 6, 7, 8 people with a mic in front of them is incredibly difficult to pull off. Plus, everyone is going to want equal mic time. And with that many voices, it becomes hard for everyone to get their points across equally. You may end up with one person who dominates the conversation, while the 7th or 8th voice gets little or no time to speak their point because someone already said it, or there simply isn't enough time without your show turning into a 3-hour marathon. Another factor to consider is the emotional investment aspect of your podcast. Your goal is to captivate your listener and get them hooked on your show. And you only have whatever time frame your podcast finishes at to accomplish this. So let's say you want to hook your listener in an hour's time. How can you do that if you have 9 different voices going back and forth on the first episode your listener tunes into? For one, they won't really know who to invest in. And since it's audio, they may not know who the hell is talking at any given point. So how can they get emotionally invested in your podcast if they have no idea what's going on? If this happens, the likelihood of that person coming back to listen to more is very slim. You can go back to episode 8 of Pod Theory to learn more about the cardinal rule of podcasting, which, in my opinion, and as I state on that episode, is that it's all about the listener. When planning out your podcast, be sure to land on a number of co-hosts that make sense for the delivery of your content to your listeners. If you aren't sure how many to feature, stick to the radio axiom and keep things limited to 3. You can also have 1 to 2 established co-hosts on your show and rotate in different personalities for the third. This will allow for different viewpoints, a fresh perspective each episode, and keep things manageable for you in every facet of your podcast. The punchline here is don't overthink it. Sure, it may seem fun to get as many personalities as possible on your podcast at once, but when you go too crazy with it, the cons far outweigh the pros. Do what's best for your content and, most importantly, for your audience. And that's going to bring this installment of Pod Theory to its conclusion. If you enjoyed our time together today, please take a few seconds of your time to leave a rating and review for the show on Apple Podcasts. Thank you very much in advance. Good talk. I'll see you back here tomorrow. This has been Jason Cercone on Pod Theory.